Hello, Trinity Faith family. Really glad to be with you here today. My name is Craig Pfeiffer. If you don't know me, I was a youth pastor there at Trinity for a long time, but for the last 8 years I've been here in Colorado. So I'm really excited and thankful to be able to talk with you today. But before I get going, I want to talk about something that's really, really important that my sermon's not really touching on, and I want to take some time to make sure I address it. Not just set it aside so we can just, okay, we got that out of the way. Now we can talk about more important things. But it's something I just want to address. So it was important enough that I wrote it down because I didn't want to just say it off the cuff and mess it up. And so if you don't mind, I just want to read this to you. Today's sermon has very little to do with current events. I want to make sure that I don't come across tone deaf, and I want to communicate that I trust this church and her leadership to lead and care for this community at this difficult time. I will say this about the current events that are going on around us right now. I will say this: if the people of God who embrace the truth that all humans are image bearers of God, and if the followers of the man God Jesus, who died for all mankind once and for all, if we do not lead out in racial reconciliation, we have missed maybe the most important opportunity of our lifetimes to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. It's important for us to be reminded of that, to be reminded that the entire gospel is a gospel of reconciliation. And if people who are called agents of reconciliation, who are tasked with the bringing the good news that God not only wants to reconcile himself to us, but wants us to reconcile to one another, if we do not lead out in that area, we are missing an opportunity, and we are missing out on really a premature picture of what heaven will be like. That's what we're called to do is until we have the actual heaven here on earth, to do our best and do our part to make heaven here on earth. And that can start right here, right now, through our efforts in racial reconciliation. So I know you guys are already on that. I know that your leadership of your church is already encouraging you to move forward in that. Keep going after that. And let's take up every conversation, every opportunity to show the love of Jesus Christ in this really, really hard time. So with that being said, I'm looking forward to talking with you today about something that has really come up during this time of COVID. Now, if you're looking at me, you're like, did Craig just get done at the dentist? His lip looks like it's numb or something, or it's kind of not really moving with the rest of his face. I'll just let you know, 3 weeks ago this Sunday, I had a bad mountain bike wreck. I went on a long ride early in the morning, and I was wrapping it up, had less than a mile to go, and I was just going around this corner, and my bike slid out, and I never even got my hands off the handlebars. Never got the hands off the handlebars, and I just slammed my face into a rock, and it was very painful. And so I cut myself pretty much from just underneath my nose all the way through my lip, and chipped my tooth. So you're going to see a little gap in a tooth there that hasn't been fixed yet. And then cut myself, kind of gave myself the Harrison Ford cut down here. That cut was intense. That one went all the way through and inside my mouth. I got stitches inside my mouth. I got internal stitches, and I got stitches on the outside. So it was pretty intense. Matter of fact, I got to hear a doctor say something that you don't ever want to hear your doctor say as he's stitching you up. He was stitching me up, and he goes, "Oh, hey, look, I found your tooth." So I won't gross you out with any pictures, but if you're into that stuff, if you want to see the gory stuff, go ahead and email me at craigpfeiffer@gmail.com, and I will send you the before. This is the after. I'll send you the before pic of that, and it's really, really beautiful. I think it's going to make the Christmas card this year. So anyways, try not to be distracted by my upper lip and by my chipped tooth, because what we're going to talk about today is super important. And what we're going to talk about today really came up in the forefront of my mind because of this COVID-19. Now, I don't know about you, but we had about 2 months. It's really, here in Colorado, they're really letting up, and it's feeling very much like normal again. I know that's not the case in Washington yet, but it's feeling very much like normal. But there's 2 months when we only spent time with our family members, and we spent a lot of time in the house, and we spent a lot of time in isolation. And it was difficult. When I went to the hospital, I got my face fixed a couple weeks ago, really highlighted how much I missed other human contact, because the doctor had me sitting up, and he was checking my neck, and he was checking my spine, kind of reached around me to feel my spine and everything like that. And I said to him, I'm pretty sure you're the first non-family member to touch me in 2 months. I mean, we just were isolated, and we were with our family all the time, and some of that was really, really great, and other parts of it were really, really tough. But in that, hopefully you learned some stuff. One of the things I learned is I need to go a long way in what we want to talk about today. I learned that I don't do a great job of prepaying grace. Meaning, I don't expect the best out of people, and sometimes it's even worse with my own family members. That I kind of expect the worst from them, and then when my expectations don't meet reality of what I want them to do, or what I want them to say, or how I want them to act, I put suspicion in there right away. I'm like, what is wrong with them? And what are they thinking? And why do they hate me so much? And why do they want to ruin their own lives? And why do they want to do all of this? Rather than putting trust or faith in that they're going to, that they're going through something, and they're working it out on their own. And what I learned was that I'm really not great at that. And the way I learned it is by my kids, and even Diana saying things to me like, I wish you thought the best of me. Like, that's what you think? That's what you think why I did that? Oh man, I wish you knew how much I really love you, and I wouldn't do that. And so for me, it was a real eye-opener to see that I do not do a great job of prepaying grace. That I put suspicion in these unmet expectations rather than trust that they love me, that they want the best, that they're on the same team as me. And so today I want to look at a time that we see this happen in the Bible, and what we can learn from the two different groups that put suspicion in there, and groups that put trust in there, and see what we can learn from them today. So we come up with this story in the book of Acts. And I love the book of Acts. It's a narrative. It's just an unfolding story of how the church began and how the church started. The second half of Acts is mostly about Paul. Luke and Paul travel around, and Luke writes down everything that happens. And Paul is doing his thing. He's preaching. He's getting arrested. He's being shipwrecked. He's doing all kinds of stuff. And so it's really a fun book to read. And today we're going to see a story in it. In Acts chapter 21, kind of in the middle of that chapter. So go ahead and grab your Bibles if you have them and go there. I'll give you a little lead up of what's happening. Paul is on his way back with Luke this time, on his way back to Jerusalem. And the last time he was there was 7 years ago. He was there for the Council of Jerusalem. And it was where all the church leaders and all the elders got together, and they talked through some stuff that had been going on. They needed to get some wisdom on. They needed to move forward on. And here's what the issue was. The issue was we had all of these Jewish people who now recognized Jesus as the Messiah, their long-awaited Messiah. They had been doing this substitutional atonement, putting their sins on a goat or a sheep or a cow, and that would pay for their sins. And now they finally recognize Jesus as the Son of God and their new Lamb of God, and they put their faith in him and put their sins on him, and he became their substitutional atonement. And so people were rejoicing in the fact, and you had all these Jews that was like, yes, he is the Messiah. And then we had all these Gentiles who were hearing about this, and they were like, wow, so this guy forgives sin. He makes me righteous. I mean, I don't have to keep on working for my own righteousness. I can put my trust and my faith and my righteousness in the hands of Jesus, who was sent by God because he loves me so much, and I could just be part of this. Oh, man, I want some of that. And so then we had the Gentiles coming to know Jesus Christ. And they began to do church together. And what was happening was The Jewish people were saying, oh man, we're so great you're here. We're so glad you're here, Gentiles. And we're so glad you chose Jesus. But man, have we got a deal for you. If you really want to be a Christian, if you really want to follow Jesus, if you want to take your faith to the next level, you should do what we do. You should follow the law. The law was laid out by God, and it was there to show us how we needed him and we couldn't do it on our own. And so you'll get a better understanding and a better reality of your own faith and your newfound faith in Jesus Christ if you would just go fully in and become Jewish. And the Gentiles were like, that sounds great. I want more of Jesus. I don't want less of Jesus. I want more of Jesus. So if you're offering me more of Jesus, I will take it. And they're like, okay, great. Well, here's what you got to do. Saturdays, you can't work. You can't do anything. You just got to chill. You got to use that time with your family. You get to do that time focusing on God. And you're gonna just do nothing from evening of Friday night to evening of Saturday night. Can you do that? And they're like, hey, I love to chill. Chilling is like the top 3 for me. And if I'll just designate Saturday as my chill day, my hang out with family day, not a problem. So I'm in, right? So I've got more of Jesus. I'm like, yeah, you're in. A couple more things, though. Just a couple more things. Bacon. You can't do bacon. And they're like, no bacon? Like, yeah, no bacon. So and these Gentiles were like, how about can I do bacon bits? It's just bits, right? It's not the whole bacon. It's just bits of bacon. Can I do that? And they're like, no, you can't. They're like, whew. All right, well, hey, the whole giving up Saturday and chilling, that was easy. Bacon's going to be a little tougher. But, hey, if it gets me more Jesus, I want it. And then they're like, okay. And you guys, to kind of next step, more Jesus, more understanding, more faith. If you want that, here's the other thing you have to do. It's just a quick little surgery. It's just not a big deal. It's just you just snip. It's kind of just you're in and you're out. And to this, the Gentiles were like, say what? First you want to give us Saturdays, and then you want me to not eat bacon, even bacon bits, and now you want me to. No. You say it's in and out. Well, I am out, right? And so you had all these people who are pushing back from this newfound faith in Jesus, because you had these other people who were called Judaizers trying to say, everyone, if you're going to follow Jesus, you also have to become Jewish, fully Jewish in every way. And Paul was saying, no, you don't have to do that. That's not the way Jesus talked about this new faith. It's not the way that Jesus talked about this new way of being human. You don't have to do that. You have to put your faith fully in Jesus Christ, trust in him 100% for your righteousness, and have him take your sins upon the cross in a substitutionary atonement. That's what you have to do to become a Jesus follower. You don't have to become a Jew to follow Jesus. And so there's this big debate. They all got together in Jerusalem. Peter and James and all these guys, they all got together and they talked it out. And what they said at the very end of it was, hey, if you're a Jew and you have recognized Jesus as your Messiah, way to go. You've made the right choice. Christ has fulfilled the law. And it is right and it is good for you to continue in your tradition, to continue in your ways, continue in all of that. And continue to be zealous for the law, because that part of your life will only add to your faith in Jesus Christ. The history you have in that and the connection you have in that will add to your faith in Jesus Christ. But it is keeping others from following Jesus by heaping all of that on them. And by the way, you want to put this law on them, you can't even follow it yourself. So you're trying to put something you can't even do on people who've never heard of this. It's just too much, and it's become an obstacle for them to fall in love with Jesus and for them to recognize their need for Jesus and for them to engage in this new way of living. And so, no, for Gentiles, we are not going to emphasize that. If Gentiles want to do that and they want to go dive full into Judaism, fine, they can do that. But we're not going to push that on them. The things that are most important to us is that they live in a world where there's all these false gods. And so we want to encourage them to have nothing to do with those false gods. Don't engage in their festivals. Don't eat their meat. Don't eat the meat that was sacrificed to those gods. Just stay away from that whole thing, because we're afraid that might suck them back in. So stay away from that, and then also pursue sexual integrity at 100%. Pursue that 100%, because we know that in the culture and in the way that that your culture uses sexuality to worship other gods, we're afraid that you're going to get caught up and taken up in that. So pursue sexual integrity 100%. And so that's what we say for Gentiles. And Paul was like, sounds great. I'll go back with that. I'll go back up to Turkey. I'll go back to Greece. I'll go back up and take that good news to Antioch and everything like that. So he goes back, and for 7 years, he goes to these different churches in different places. He plants churches. He shares the good news of Jesus Christ. To the Jew, he says he is the Messiah. Embrace him. They say, yes, I'll embrace him. I'm in. To the Gentile, he says, he is the one and true God, the Son of God, come to die for your sins. Embrace him and accept him for 100% of your righteousness. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to do all these other things that you're doing with other gods. He prepaid grace towards you and prepaid his love towards you on the cross. And all you have to do is say yes and step into that. And so he does that. But then rumors get started about him. Rumors are saying that he is teaching Jewish followers of Jesus the same way he is teaching Gentile followers of Jesus. That they should just neglect the law and don't worry about it, and throw away your tradition and throw away your past and throw away your culture. You don't need to do any of that stuff. And so we have all these rumors. And as he's coming back now, he's coming back to Jerusalem one last time. And these rumors have gotten there before him. And there's these people that have heard these rumors, and these two different groups interact with him in two different ways about this rumor. So we're going to see how the first group interacts with him. Acts 21, verses 17 through 23 goes like this. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the we there is Luke, who's writing this, and Paul and some other guys, probably Timothy and some other guys too. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. So he goes to see the leader of the church there in Jerusalem, and all the elders were there. And so Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles in his ministry. So it's kind of that old school missionary shows up to church with the slides and shows everything they do. And everyone's like, woohoo, yeah, we love it, we love it. So when they heard this, they praised God. And they said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them zealous for the law. So we have, now that you're in Jerusalem, you look around, you see all these Jewish people who put their faith in Jesus Christ and see that they're still zealous for the law. They still love the law. The law is a big part of their daily life, their culture, their family, and how they perceive God. And so they're really big into that still. They have been informed that you teach all Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. So he said, we heard this rumor, and man, we are so glad to hear it's not true. We're so excited. We were hoping and praying that this wasn't true. We've been waiting for you to show up and share with us what's going on, because we knew you, and we kind of just trusted that you weren't doing that. We knew that you were called by God to do this. And so we have been waiting to hear this good news from you, and we are so glad we heard it. But at the same time, they're worried for him. They say, well, all these Jewish people, and they're all Christians, and they're zealous for the law, and they've heard this about you. So what shall we do? They will certainly hear you have come, so do what we tell you. So they come up with this plan for Paul to show that he's still fully Jewish and he's still zealous for the law. And so they have this plan. They said, all right, you're going to have to go to the temple. You've been in unclean countries, so you're going to have to go through the purity, the ritual to become ritualistically clean so you could go into the temple. So everyone will see that and see that you're still zealous for the law, and you're all like, yay, the law, yay, Moses. And so that'll be big. And they said, let's double down on that. We've got some friends here who are finishing up a vow they made at the temple. And so when you finish a vow, it's kind of like Lent, where you would stop something or give up something. You would complete and run out this vow in your life. And at the end of it, you would come to the temple and you would say to the priest, hey, I did this vow, and you would give an offering of your vow there. And so it would be like, I did this, and not only did I do this, but I'm showing I did this by making this even greater commitment and sacrifice by giving this offering of a vow here at the temple. They said, so here's what we want to do. Go to the temple with our friends. Go get ritualistically cleansed so you could go in with them. And then pay their vow offering. And everyone will see that, and they'll realize there's no way that these rumors are true. There's no way that Paul was going around and doing this thing. And everyone will be chill, and they'll be like, all right, Paul's back, and those must have been rumors and things like that. And so that's what he does. He goes and does all those things, and he does it perfectly. And from their viewpoint, it was the right thing to do. It was excellent. But sadly, it didn't work. Now, I don't know if it didn't get out there. There wasn't a good photo op for Paul, paying the offering for this. For some reason, the news doesn't get out, or at least maybe it does get out, and people they're just stuck on what they think about Paul, stuck on what they thought about Paul, and they're not moving from it. And so here's how the other group reacts to Paul being there. Whoops. Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd. So maybe they didn't even give him the opportunity to show that he was zealous for the law. They just saw him at the temple, and they just started right in on him. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us. This is a man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place." And so they just hop right on it. So what we see here is we see two different groups, right? We have two different groups, and they have two completely different reactions to Paul. But still, there's one reality. There's only one reality through this whole thing, right? The reality is that Paul was doing this mission work, and that these rumors got started, and they perceived these realities, and they took them in, and these realities created a gap, right? They create a gap, and a gap is the difference between what we expect and perceive. The difference between what we expect and the perceived reality or the actual reality creates a gap. All right, when we expect someone to do this, and then we hear back that they didn't do it, or we just see that it didn't happen, it creates this gap. And we don't know, right? We have our expectations here, and we have reality here, and there's a gap between those. You see, we have two different groups and two different reactions, and here's the difference between these groups. Is one group filled that gap, right? They have expectations, and they have reality, or at least perceived reality with the rumors they were hearing. They have that gap, and one group put trust in there. They said, you know what? We know Paul. We know he's called by God. We've heard him teach. We've seen him live this out in front of us. So we're just going to trust that what we're hearing is not true, or that there's a good explanation for this. And then the other group fill the gap with suspicion, right? They hear the same stuff. They have the same gap between reality and expectation, and they fill it with suspicion. They probably think things like, well, sure, he does stuff like this. He was never with us to begin with. You remember when we first met Paul? He was killing and imprisoning Christians. So I saw this coming a mile away. They put suspicion in that gap rather than trust. And so we see these two different groups, the suspicious group and the group of trust. And honestly, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the type of person that fills that gap with trust and says, well, you know what, I'm just going to hope for the best? Or do you want to be the type of person that puts suspicion in that gap? I mean, of course, You don't even have to be a Jesus follower to say, no, I'd rather be the type of person that puts trust in that gap. I want to be someone who thinks the best of people and not immediately goes to thinking the worst of them. I want to be the person that puts trust in them. But so often, we are the person who puts suspicion in there. We are the ones that do not offer grace until we get a good explanation. We do not prepay grace like Jesus prepaid grace to us. And so we can learn something from this group of suspicion. And maybe you can even see yourself in some of their reactions and how they handled things. If we look at this group, the second group, of the group that put suspicion in the gap, look what they did. Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul in the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd. These people, the people that put suspicion in this gap, they need people to come alongside with them and agree with them, and so they don't feel bad about the way they're thinking about these people. They need people to step on and say, yeah, you're right. He did do wrong. They need people to come alongside and begin to dig the grave that they want to put this person in. Are you that way? Suspicion speaks to others rather than the person. Suspicion, if you fill the gap with suspicion, you're going to talk about that person to other people. You're going to throw gasoline on these rumors. Are you seeing yourself in this? Do you often, when you have a gap between your expectations and reality, go to other people and talk about that? Or do you go straight to that person? Well, these people stirred up the whole crowd. They would rather talk to the whole crowd than Paul. So the people that put suspicion in the gap, they spoke to others rather than Paul. I remember when I first came on at Trinity, Brad and I talked, and we had a list of things that we needed from each other. And one of the things that Brad wrote on his list was, if we have a problem, here's what I need from you. If there's a problem between you and I, here's what I need from you. I need you to either come talk to me about it or get over it. And those are your two options. You either get over it or you talk to me about it, but you don't go talk to anybody else. And that was a principle we lived by, and it really, to today, is the reason why we have such a great relationship. Instead of filling the gap with suspicion, we fill it with trust, and we go to the person rather than to others. All right. Next thing we see in this group of suspicious people is, here's what they begin shouting out. Fellow Israelites, help us, this man who teaches everyone everywhere. Here's what people do. Here's what I do when I put suspicion in that gap. I use hyperbole, or hyperbole, as I like to say, hyperbole to justify my personal outrage. I just can't believe they would do this. They ruined our lives. They ruined our weekend. They ruined our summer. I can't believe they would do this. I can't believe that they would shut down the schools. I can't believe they shut down Disneyland. They ruined everything, right? These people are saying, he taught everyone everywhere. Don't you know that's not even possible, right? They use hyperbole or hyperbole. Why do they spell it hyperbole? Anyways, they use hyperbole to justify their own personal outrage. They make a mountain out of a molehill to justify their own personal outrage. Are you seeing yourself in this? I know I'm seeing myself in this. I have used exaggeration. I have used hyperbole. I have used passive aggressiveness in these situations when there's this gap and I put suspicion in. That's not the type of person you want to be. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, you just don't want to be that type of person. So when we put trust in that gap rather than suspicion, we avoid being the type of person that uses exaggeration or hyperbole to make ourselves feel better about this mountain that we're making. And we go on. And besides, he brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place. People who put suspicion inside that gap, they manufacture evidence to prove their point. They just make stuff up. For instance, he didn't do this. He did not bring Greeks inside the temple. He brought them to the gates of the temple, but he did not bring them inside the temple itself. And so they manufacture evidence, right? They're building a case. Before they even get to talk to someone, before they get to hear their side, they have filled that gap with suspicion, which means they have to build a case against them. And even if that means manufacturing evidence against them, they will do that, right? That's not the type of person you and I want to be. But how many times have we done that? Right? Person's late again. Or we hear some incidents like, they weren't at work yesterday because they called in sick. But I heard that Tim saw Bobby jogging at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he called in sick. How do you go jogging if you're sick? And so we already have Tim, who's an eyewitness to this. And what really happened was that Bobby didn't call in sick. What he did was he called in that his kids were sick, and he stayed home with them until his wife got home around 3 o'clock, and then he went for a jog because honestly he's been with sick kids all day long and he needed to get out of the house. So we manufacture evidence in these gaps. And it just turns us into an ugly person, a person we don't want to be. Suspicion simply assumes the worst. Patrick Lencioni, who's a prolific writer and a great writer on leadership, calls this the fundamental attribution error. Meaning, it's the tendency to attribute negative or frustrating behaviors of colleagues to their intentions and personalities. Where we say about Betty, Betty's always late. She's always late because she just doesn't care about other people's time. She doesn't even really like her job, and she doesn't care about us as a team. But when we come to ourselves when we're late, it's because of traffic, because somebody spilled a whole gallon of milk and I had to help clean it up. There's all these reasons we give ourselves. For our reasons for being late, we pick environmental reasons. But for other people's reasons for being late, we say they have poor intention. It's a personality flaw. It's all messed up. But for ourselves, we cut ourselves slack in that. And here's some truth that we need to think about and talk about, especially as our country is going through this time. And as we become race reconciliators in our community. Is there's groups of people that we assume the worst about. We go straight to their intentions and their personality flaws. Just because of the color of their skin, because where they grew up, because of their income level, we attribute their negative and frustrating behaviors to their intentions and personalities. But we cut slack to people who are of the same race as us, or we cut slack to people who are the same socioeconomic background as us. We do that, and it's not okay, and it needs to end today. So this is what people who put suspicion in that gap do. Let's see what people who put trust in that gap. When we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. They engaged the person before the gap, right? So these people had heard the same thing that the suspicious people heard. They heard the same rumors, the same everything. But they engaged the person rather than the gap. They said, you know what? I love this person. I'm going to celebrate that they're here. Yeah, eventually we're going to talk about this. We're going to get to the bottom of this. I want to hear what's really going on here. But forget the gap right now. I love this person and I want to engage with them. That's what trust allows us to do. Allows us to engage the person, not the gap. Right? So they go through and Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. That when we fill the gap with trust, we eagerly await the details. Right? Well, we assume that the details are going to be liberating. We're going to assume that the details are going to set us free and set that person free. We assume the details are going to be good for our relationship, and that our trust will pay off when we get those details. So we fill that gap between expectation and reality. We fill it with trust. That means, hey, I'm ready to hear your side of the story. And I am hoping for the best out of your side of the story. We eagerly await the details when we put trust in there. We don't push them away or already make up our mind about the details. We eagerly await the details from the person who knows what the reality is because they were living it. We go on with the group that put trust in there. When they heard this, they praised God. The person who puts trust in that gap celebrates the truth. They don't take pleasure in other people's pain. They don't take pleasure in the drama of the story. They hope for the best and not the worst. They're not looking for that I got you moment. They celebrate the truth. Next. You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews believed. What they do is they laid out before them the perceived gap. You see, brothers, this is what was going on. We were worried about this. We heard this rumor. There was this gap. And so I'm going to take the time to communicate that perceived gap to you. I want to share with what we heard and how relieved we are that it wasn't true. When we put trust in those gaps, we can have that open conversation. We can be real with that person and share, here's what we heard, and here's why. We were on pins and needles a little bit. I mean, we were filling that gap with trust, and we were ready to hear good news, but we were also prepared, man, if this is true, we got to deal with this. They're able to communicate the perceived gap. And last, they say, all right, well, now we've got this big problem. We got all other Jews who don't believe you, and they may be filling the gap with suspicion rather than trust. And so they say, what shall we do? And then they come up with a plan. Do what we tell you to do. And what the whole thing they were trying to do here was they were trying to squash rumors. They were trying to save Paul from more pain and from more frustration and more interference in what God wanted him to do. And so when we feel that gap with trust, we eagerly step in. When we find the truth, we help that person out. And we say, all right, when someone comes to us, well, can you believe what Linda did? I cannot believe what Linda did. And he said, actually, I just met with Linda. And actually, a total misunderstanding. Linda didn't do that at all. As a matter of fact, she did this. And isn't that great? Aren't you glad you heard the good news? And do me a favor, if you hear someone that have heard the wrong thing about Linda, would you just communicate this truth to them? Because we want Linda to be able to get off on the right foot with all of these people that she's going to be interacting with. Could you do that? Great. So what will it be for you and me? When those gaps come up, and those gaps are going to come up, right? Will you fill it with trust or suspicion? And here's what I would say is you are going to create gaps, right? None of us are perfect. We're all going to create gaps. People are going to have certain expectations of us, and we are just not going to be able to make it to the expectation, and there's going to be this gap. Well, what do you want, right? Or we could say it this way. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. When you create a gap, isn't that what you want? Don't you want someone to step in with trust rather than suspicion, to give you the benefit of the doubt? Wouldn't you rather that be the case for you? Then let's make that the case for others when we have a perceived gap or a gap in reality between us. I got a little bit of homework for you guys. Go ahead and write these down, pause it on the screen, or I'm sure Chris will probably get these out to you too. But here's some questions I want you to ask yourself, and I want you to work through this week. First one, in gaps you have created, what have you done to restore trust? So you've created gaps, right? We've all made mistakes. We've all blown it. We want to give the gift of trustworthiness to those people who work with us, those people who live with us, and who are in our family. What do we need to do to restore that trust? You were late picking your kid up, right? You didn't want to do that. Things kind of got out of hand. You need to restore that trustworthiness. So you need to talk to your kid and say, hey, that's not who I want to be. I'm sorry that happened. And I'm going to do my very best so that I can be a trustworthy parent. I'll be here on time. I know how frustrating it is to be picked up late. And I will do my best to make sure that doesn't happen again. So what can you do to restore trust in the gaps that you created? Are there people around you filling gaps with suspicion and rumors? What does trust require? So are there people around you, like the people you work with, people in your family, that are interacting with others, gaps between what their expectations and reality, and are filling them with rumors? How do you respond to that? How can you lovingly step in and say, you know what, let's hold off on jumping to conclusions. Let's hold off on saying things that we just don't know. Let's wait till we get the truth about this. You know what? They're not even here today, so let's not even talk about it. Let's wait till we get them back, and let's just assume that they made a good choice, and we'll just wait on that. What does trust require of you, right? To put trust in that gap, what do you have to do? How do you have to step up into that situation and make sure that you are not only giving trust, but you're promoting trust in your home, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, and in your schools? Is there a difficult conversation that needs to happen, right? So this is not a call to just be a doormat, right? Someone just constantly is creating gap after gap after gap after gap. And you just are like, well, I'm sure they have a good reason. I'm sure that they have a good excuse. And I'm sure it's valid. I'm sure all these things. Eventually, there's enough gap created where you need to sit down and say, hey, there is something going on. I have these expectations and they rarely get met. You and I need to have a hard conversation. Do you need to have one of those hard conversations this week? Let me just say this. If you don't need to have one of those hard conversations this week, watch out. Someone probably needs to have one of those hard conversations with you. And here's a big question to talk about. And maybe talk in your small group about this around your dinner table tonight and with your family. Is there a people group who always gets your suspicion rather than your trust? Is there a race? Is there a certain quality of person? Is there people from a certain neighborhood that always get your suspicion rather than your trust? How will you address that? And last, here's a question for the whole group. The question is this: what would Trinity be like? What would your school be like? What would your workplace be like if you put trust in these gaps rather than suspicion? What if at Trinity, when anything came up that you were just like, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. What are they thinking? What are the deacons thinking? What is the search team thinking? How is this happening? What if instead of suspicion, you put trust in there? And you did the things that we saw the people in Acts chapter 21 do. How they extended trust and they hoped for the best and they waited for the details. They did all that. What if you did that same thing? What type of environment would Trinity, what type of culture would Trinity have? What if you did that in your workplace? How could you change the culture of your workplace? By putting trust into those gaps rather than suspicion and rumors. What about your school or your team? If you would prepay trust into these situations rather than suspicion, think about what your world would be like if you extended trust to everyone and everyone extended trust to you in these gaps that come along in your life. It would rock your world. It would change your world and would change it for the better. So it's my prayer that we can live this out in our everyday lives, that we put trust in those gaps rather than suspicion. Let's pray for that. God, would you give us your strength and your power? Fill us with your Holy Spirit, God, and not ourselves. God, when I'm full of myself, I put suspicion in there. God, I pray that you would help me, give me the strength and your power to put trust in there. And God, every single one of us, doesn't matter who you are, where you grew up, what race you are, every single one of us are recovering racists. We all have views on different cultures and different people groups that are just not accurate and just not right, God. Would you help us to get real with ourselves and see that we do this for certain people groups that we know and familiar with? We put trust in those gaps. But other groups, we immediately put suspicion in those gaps. God, would you reform our minds and rebuild our hearts to be more like yours, to see people the way you see them, God. And may that be infectious in our community, God. May that through us and through this church, you bring healing and racial reconciliation to our culture, to Walla Walla, to our world. God, we love you. God, thank you so much, God, that you prepaid grace into my life. That you loved me before I knew you, before I loved you, before I put my faith in you. God, help me to be like you to people around me. God, I pray that that starts in my home and goes to my church and goes all the way out into our community. God, we love you. We pray this in your son's name. Amen. All right, Trinity, thanks for having me. And here comes Chris. Or maybe this way.